Welcome to the International Psychoanalytical Association webinar series. Today, may I have the slides? We have a treat. We have the topic of today is behind the scenes of toxic polarization, consequences of a divided world. Part 2. This is a continuation of a webinar. We did a bit previously with these same presenters. It was such an exciting topic with such good response that we decided to have a part 2. So welcome. This is an activity of the IPA Communication Committee. The chair of our committee is Sylvia Weinbuch, and the coordinator of these webinars is Mariano Rupertus. A couple of notes. This is a terrific topic. I'm very excited. We're not just talking about conflicts around the world, but it comes home. We have conflicts of a similar nature in our personal lives, with our neighbors, with our patients, even within ourselves. And so what does this other with whom the conflict occurs represent to ourselves? There's a quote from Mahatma Gandhi that's often paraphrased as "Be the change you wish to see in the world," and I'd like for that to be our goal. Each of our speakers today have experience in conflict and understanding conflicts, both personally and in their leadership positions that pertain to this topic, and so I'll introduce them each as I go along. I am Chris Heath. I'm chair of external communications at the IPA. I'm also a member of an organization in the United States, the Group for the Advancement of Psychiatry, which is a think tank for psychiatric progress. I'm on a committee for psychiatry in the media. I got started with outreach. Oh, can we go back to me just for a second? I was awarded a grant by the Psychoanalytic Electronic Publishing, PEPWeb, which is a tremendous database for psychoanalytic papers. I was awarded a video grant back in 2013. My series is still available there, Mind Your Mind, which is available free on the PEPWeb site, and putting in lay terms psychoanalytic concepts. And please find me on social media. Currently, I'm most active on TikTok as Chris Heath, MD. Next slide. Now, this webinar has slightly changed, a slightly different format. It's still the same structure. I'll give a few instructions here in a moment, and then I'll introduce our speakers. Each of our speakers this time will be only speaking for about 5 minutes. And then, because this is a part 2, and we want to promote dialogue between our presenters, they've each generated some questions. And so I'll ask the presenters to each answer a question from the presenters, and we'll make time for discussion from questions from the audience as well. Next slide. But your participation is a crucial part of this. We really treasure that we have an audience that's engaged, and if you have questions, we want to hear them. They're at the bottom of the Zoom platform. There should be a button that says Q&A section or something like that. That's where you need to submit questions. Questions will be presented anonymously. The audience won't see those questions. That will only be seen by we administrators. We'll receive the questions, and hopefully we can get to all of them at the end. Next slide. Subtitles are available in English. Another button at the bottom of the Zoom dashboard should show CC, which is closed captions. Next slide. This is important. Remember that this is being recorded, and in fact, it will be uploaded to the IPA webpage and to the YouTube our YouTube page. You'll be sent a link as a registered attendee. So please feel free to watch it again if there are moments that that you'd like to see. But most importantly, please share this. Once you get that link, share it with friends, social media, anywhere that you can find. Now, the participants, the audience can only interact through Q&A. Your chat and microphone functions won't be operating during this. When you connect, if you ask questions, they will be presented anonymously, but please, when you link in, use your name and surname so that we can appropriately keep you involved with the webinar. Otherwise, you may be asked to leave. Next slide. Again, this webinar is a treat. We have 3 presenters with a great deal of experience in both leadership and in their psychoanalytic practices. Our first speaker is Heribert Bloss. He is the current IPA president-elect. He is a training and supervising analyst for adults, children, and adolescents, and also a specialist in psychosomatic medicine and psychotherapy and psychiatry. One moment. He's a member of the German Psychoanalytic Association, the DPV, and the IPA. He is president. He is still currently president of the European Psychoanalytic Federation, the European regional organization, and he works in private practice in Dusseldorf, Germany. The title of his speech is "What Do We Mean Today by the Soft Voice of the Intellect in the Face of Toxic Polarization?" Dr. Bloss, please.
Yeah, Chris, thank you very much for your kind introduction, and hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here again together with all of you. And we are holding our second webinar on toxic polarization today. And I'm glad that we are able to address some questions that we unfortunately did not have time to answer during our first webinar. I would like to say first that I found the exchange with Sue and Claudio, as well as with Chris, last time very insightful and enriching. And I also thank all the attendants of our first webinar very much for the good and challenging questions and comments that we received from all of you. As we were unfortunately unable to deal with all of them, all your questions and comments, we agreed in preparation for today's seminar that the 3 of us, as Chris said, should each try to formulate answers to topics of particular personal interest. You will hear this later. In the meantime, since our last webinar, many toxic polarizations have unfortunately continued in various areas of the world, or the most brutal acts of violence have become known, or terrible destruction continues to take place, so that the question arises as to whether we should not despair after all. For many people who themselves or whose relatives and friends have been victims of sometimes targeted barbaric violence or general destruction, the personal situation is desperate. We should remain aware of this fact and recognize that there can be no naive, I would say naive, principle of hope. The utopian potential of hope, as Ernst Bloch, a German philosopher from whom I took this expression, already knew, can never be simple and naive. But it should also not become cynical in the face of real suffering. At this point, I would like to comment on the impression that was given in some reactions to our first webinar, as if we ourselves had maintained a polarization by opposing anti-Semitism, but not anti-Islamism. This was one of the very important comments. I would like to emphasize that I find it regrettable if this impression has arisen. For of course, anti-Islamism is also one of the persecutory prejudices that we deal with as analysts. However, the extremely tragic Middle East conflict cannot be understood in terms of a simple contrast between anti-Islamism and anti-Semitism. The terrible polarization in the Middle East has many historical roots, and a deeper understanding goes beyond the scope of our webinar. However, I would like to point out that the toxicity of a conflict always deepens when the struggle for self-preservation is combined with the dehumanization of the other or the others, which is then intended to legitimize one's own destructive sadism. Whenever these persecutions affect Jews or Muslims, or any other ethnic group, or any socially discriminated group, like people of color, for instance, we as psychologists have to care. I think this is very important for all of us, that we don't make any exclusion about this. Coming back to the idea of hope. As analysts, we are aware of the potential for human destruction. We must ask ourselves whether there can be any reason for hope and what, if anything, we can do to contribute to the survival of hope. I think that this question was also at least implicit in some of the comments of our last webinar. One of the few points about which Freud was optimistic was his conviction that, in comparison to human instinctual life, he, as he called it, the soft voice of the intellect would eventually be heard after a courtless succession of rebuffs. How can we as psychoanalysts understand and implement this astonishing optimism today? I think this can only be done today by expanding the concept of intellect, because intellect means emotional understanding. And especially in the face of toxic polarizations, it seems all the more important to try to understand the emotional motivations behind polarized views and actions. Is it possible to empathize with the inner experience of an individual opponent or an opposing group? This is usually not possible. However, the psychoanalytic framework and the use of our countertransference offer a unique opportunity to enable understanding of the other person's emotions, motives, and especially mortifications or traumas. This relates also to larger groups of humans. In contact with large groups, it's crucial that we as analysts are open to the feelings and imaginatively processed life experiences of all participants. Yeah? With our countertransference in particular, we have a chance to sense the personal and or transgenerational hurts that underlie any radicalization. Our soft voice of the intellect today consists of making these individual and or collective hurts heard and recognized so that they do not have to break through so violently. This is my try to answer this question. Thank you.
Next, we have Sue Kolod, who, and by the way, a couple of remarks. One is a housekeeping issue. These webinars are recorded and they go on the YouTube channel for the International Psychoanalytical Association. Please feel free to see the others that we've had. The other, Sue Kolod is in a study group with me that I want to encourage other people to develop. She and I have had a study group for about 2 years now that has a number of psychoanalysts, but also some other professions. We have educator, we have an attorney, we have a videographer, and we trust one another. And we talk about these issues around depolarization. I encourage everyone to have a community of that type where you can disagree, you can have camaraderie, and because changes in these areas are very difficult to make. So the introduction of our next speaker, Sue Kolod, is president-elect of NAPSAC, the North American Regional Organization, the North American Psychoanalytic Confederation. She served on the board of the IPA for 2 terms from 19 to 23, and on the executive committee of the IPA as a representative from North America from 21 to 23. She is a supervising and training analyst and member of the faculty at the William Allenson White Institute here in the United States, and co-leads the Depolarization Project with Chris Heath. Thank you for the shout out. Dr. Kolod is also a member of the board of directors at the American Psychoanalytic Association. The title of her presentation is, "What is Your Chosen Trauma?" Sue.
So I want to thank Chris and the Communications Committee for inviting us back to continue this dialogue. During and after the last webinar, several people asked, what can we do to help alleviate toxic polarization? I'll tell you my own experience encountering potentially toxic polarization in myself and what I did about it. Vamik Volkan defines chosen trauma as the shared mental representation of a massive trauma that the group's ancestors suffered at the hands of an enemy. This chosen trauma can be reactivated when the group's identity and survival is threatened. I'm aware the term chosen could feel dismissive today, as Israelis and Palestinians have been experiencing unthinkable horrors, and none of them chose this trauma. I guess you could say the trauma chose them. Nevertheless, I believe Volkan's concept can be useful in developing the capacity and curiosity to listen to opposing, disturbing views of the other. Why do I think this is important? It's important because the field of psychoanalysis is being torn apart by toxic polarization, which has only gotten worse since October 7th. Many analysts have even expressed the view that we shouldn't talk to each other about this because it's too disturbing. But I wonder, if psychoanalysts can't talk to each other and listen to each other, who can? In the New York Times, psychologist Dr. Richard Perloff noted that in these situations, a spiral of silence develops in which people with nuanced views on both sides of the issue, perceiving that their opinions are in the minority, become reluctant to speak out. What results are simple tropes and cartoonish stereotypes that further polarize the two sides. I'm suggesting that in order for our field to survive and thrive, we need to be able to listen to the views of the other and that these views may be abhorrent to us without splitting and projection, which is another term for toxic polarization, in my opinion. Back to the chosen trauma. I mentioned at the last webinar my visceral reaction of revulsion when I read the Shihai's book, Psychoanalysis Under Occupation. We read this in our group. This made me curious. I'm not a Zionist and have had very little to do with Israel in my lifetime, especially my adult lifetime. In discussing the book with my depolarization group, many of whom felt very positive about the book, I remembered something from my childhood that seemed very relevant to my reaction. My grandmother was a hot Zionist. In 1933, she took the family from Cleveland to Palestine, where they lived for 1 year. For some reason, my grandmother decided not to emigrate, and they came back to the US, but first made a stop in Poland, where my mother, who was 11 at the time, met her grandparents and her aunts and uncles, all of whom were subsequently murdered by the Nazis. I adored my grandmother, and whenever she came to visit, she told me this story, which I loved, and I'm going to tell you the story. The story is about a mother bird who had a nest with baby birds in it. And every morning she would go out to get food for the baby birds, and she would sing this song to them. Shalom Haverim, Shalom Haverim, Shalom, Shalom, Lachitraut, Lachitraut, Shalom, Shalom, And the baby birds would respond and they would sing Shalom Chaverim, etc. This means goodbye, my friends, until we meet again. And it can also mean hello, my friends. So the mother bird went out to get food. And while she was gone, a big cat came and got into the nest and grabbed the birds and killed the birds and ate the birds. So the mother came back and she sang Shalom Chaverim, and the baby birds did not respond. And she got to the nest and she was heartbroken to see that her birds had been killed. So she decided she was going to build a nest, but it was going to be in a safer place. So she found a rose bush that had big, sharp thorns. And she laid it, she made a nest and she laid some eggs and she had some new baby birds and went off, Shalom Chaverim. And they sang back to her, Shalom Chaverim. This time the cat came and tried to get the birds, but the rose bush grabbed the cat and scratched the cat, and the cat was ripped apart and it was all bloody and the cat died and the baby birds were safe. And the mother came back and she sang Shalom Chaverim, and the baby birds sang Shalom Chaverim, and it was a happy ending. And I just wanted to add that my favorite part of the story was when the cat was ripped apart by the thorns. That's the part I loved. So I was probably about 5 or 6 when she told me this story. At some point, I realized this story was an allegory about Israel. So unconsciously, the Holocaust became my chosen trauma and Israel my chosen glory, which is another term Vamic Volkan uses. For me, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which is also referred to as the War of Independence, was a triumphal event. But as I read the Shihai book, I learned for the first time that 1948 is referred to as Nakba. The Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic, refers to the mass displacement and dispossession of Palestinians during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Somehow this realization that about Nakba as their chosen trauma. And I thought that Palestinian grandmothers, no doubt, told their grandchildren similar stories. This made me feel that I wanted to hear the stories of Nakba and to listen to the views of the other and to be open to them, no matter how disturbing they might be. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Claudio Azaric, is training and supervising analyst at the Porto Alegre Psychoanalytic Society, professor emeritus of psychiatry at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, former president of the IPA from 2005 to 2009, and of FEPAL, the Latin American Psychoanalytic Federation. He's also been a recipient of the illustrious Sigurnia Award in Psychoanalysis in 2011, with books, chapters, and papers on psychoanalytic training, practice, and institutions, and the relation of psychoanalysis and culture. His talk in a moment will be the almost impossible and the desperately needed human feat of putting oneself in the other's shoes. Dr. Azaric.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here once again with you, Sue, and Heribert. After these 2 moving and stimulating presentations by Heribert and Sue, I will read what I wrote about the almost impossible and the desperately needed human feat of putting oneself in the other's shoes. In our previous webinar, I attempted to discuss what I then called the almost impossible and the absolutely needed science and art of listening to the other. By the way, I forgot to say how pleased I am to be here with all the listeners, the viewers, and the colleagues, I suppose, both psychoanalysts and non-psychoanalysts, with whom we are sharing our ideas, our concerns, and our hopes. In the previous one, I tried to convey some examples of people and situations in which it was possible to reach this apparently impossible achievement, both at the international, national, and psychoanalytical level. I found then the presentations of Sue and Heribert, as well as the following questions raised by our colleagues, extremely stimulating, and the organizers of the IPA webinars suggested that we should have a second part, considering the relevance of this issue. So I went through the questions, kept reading about this challenging issue, and following closely, day by day, the terrible and saddening events around the world, and identified in myself a feeling that there was nothing new that I could add or change from what we had previously discussed. So it took me a reasonable amount of time to be able to write what I'm reading now. It took some time to realize that this would possibly be a consequence of the disillusionment of war, so well described by Freud, but it was followed by a certain hope that reminded me his consideration that anything that encourages the growth of emotional ties between men must operate against war. At this point, it seems to me that the attempt to listen to the other is not enough. We need to go a step forward and try to put ourselves in the other's shoes, to try to feel, to think, to imagine what is going on into his or her mind. For instance, those who are hostages under terrible conditions, those who were already released and now live the trauma post-imprisonment, those who are under bombs at the risk of being harmed or killed, or seeing their families harmed or killed, those who are living under dictatorships or pseudo-democratic dictatorships, those who are suffering from famine, cold, starvation, mental illnesses, or are victims of racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, all sorts of fanaticism, violence, aggression, all sorts of misery. And all of us who are under the threat of climate disasters produced by continuous degradation of Earth and its marvelous natural animals and resources. And last but not least, those who are happy enough to have a family, health, work, love relations, and shelter from these dangers and misery I just mentioned. More difficult, however, maybe impossible, is to put oneself in the shoes of the killers, the terrorists, from all kinds and procedures, those whose sadistic pleasure is to produce harm, suffering, death. But we must remind ourselves that these are also members of the so-called Homo sapiens. According to the Spanish newspaper El País, polarization was the most representative word throughout the world in 2023, defining any scenario in all kinds of human fields dominated by disagreement. As we can see, we are currently under toxic polarization everywhere. Psychoanalysis, since its beginning, is used to polarizations, some of them toxic, throughout its development all over the world. We psychoanalysts deal with polarizations, some of them toxic, into the minds, families, and realities of our patients, as well as in ours. In our long relationship with ourselves, with our patients, with our families, with our colleagues, institutions, and the world we live in, a great deal of time is devoted to listen, to try to understand, to identify with the other, to put ourselves in the other's shoes. In his reflections on the death or destructive drive, and on his own illusions and disillusions on psychoanalytic work, André Green showed so well how we may succeed sometimes, how we may fail other times, or how we may obtain the possible outcome. One of our most gifted colleagues, the late and dear friend Imre Szegedi, had as his motto, under all kinds of circumstances, never, ever give up. And then he showed the drawing of a frog into the beak of a stork, defiantly proclaiming this motto. Despite some disillusions that from time to time dominate our minds and make us doubt about human ability to stand against our own and mankind's death or destructive wishes, we cannot lose hope that there is always room for negotiation, for talks, for the search of some common ground, for some unexpected tenderness, and even love. Any human being who remains with his humanity present can feel, looking at the blossoming smile of a child or the face of an elderly person, full of the wrinkles of suffering and joy.
Thank you. Thank you, all three. So as I said at the beginning, because this is part two, each of the presenters had a number of thoughts and questions reflective of the process of going through this dialogue. So I'll ask a question from each of the presenters and have each of the presenters offer an answer for it. I'm going to start with one from Dr. Bloss, and it goes like this. What is the situation within international psychoanalysis? How can we find a balance between the ongoing search for common ground and the continuing recognition of cultural differences? Could this balance strengthen our competence to work in the community? And Claudio, if I may ask you to offer an answer first or thoughts.
Yes, thank you. A very good and important question that makes me initially think on one of our most gifted colleagues, Robert Wallerstein, who wrote about common ground in psychoanalysis as an opening speech of one of the psychoanalytic IPA congresses. And then this was the title of one of his books. Wallerstein discussed exactly the fact that Is there a common ground? Can there be a common ground among psychoanalysts? And his suggestion was that concerning clinical work, clinical practice, this common ground can be more easily found. But concerning theories, concerning metapsychologies, there are huge differences. So this was one of the ideas that came to my mind. So we are looking for a common ground. This is a challenge because is it possible to find a common ground? If it is possible, maybe we can consider that there is some hope. I think that in the psychoanalytic community, thinking about the IPA, that is the one I know better, we managed to establish several common grounds. For instance, the working parties, this huge movement of discussing clinical material, the work of the IPA, the work of the regional federations, the work of societies. So there is common issues that put us together. All this question of toxic polarization. But how can we make this live together with the recognition of cultural differences? I think this is really a fascinating area in which we have a lot of room to work. We are doing this, but we can go on working in this attempt to put together different people from different cultural origins. And I think this is something that we are seeing all over the world, or at least in its more civilized version. We can see people from all different origins, in different ways of works. We can see different people in our psychoanalytic institutions. And I think that this balance, as Heribert asks, can strengthen our competence to work in the community. I think also that this question is a way of continue the dialogue with what Sue and myself presented in our initial comments, because it would be easier to stand fanatically on one side, saying that the other is the enemy that should be destroyed. The other is to try to understand what's going on with the other, be it a colleague, a patient, a neighbor, someone from another culture, and try to identify and feel ourselves into his or her shoes. So I think this is a balance that it's worthwhile to continue to look for.
Now, so I'll turn to Sue Kolod. Couple of questions. So you have two alternatives here. You could answer the question, or offer thoughts for to the question, which I can repeat if you'd like to, or if you have thoughts about what Claudio said, I welcome a dialogue here. Either one. What are your thoughts, Sue?
Well, the question brought to mind my experience being on the board of the IPA. And in a way, it's a shout out to the North American region, which particularly APSA seems to feel that there's not a strong reason to be involved in the IPA. And what I found was that there were certain issues that were hot topics. One of them was the change in the Eidingen model. The other was racism. The third one was remote analysis and remote training. And the group got very, very polarized, particularly during the pandemic when when all of our meetings were online. It was very easy for there to be a lot of polarization. But when we started meeting again in person, it changed things. Particularly for me, the change in the Eidingen model to 3 to 5 times a week, hearing from colleagues, some colleagues in Europe, that they felt traumatized by that. And I came from an institute, William Alanson White, which is a training model of 3 times a week. I would roll my eyes at this. This is trauma. But I have to say that once I got in the room with my colleagues and they talk about their history and their feelings and the background and where they came to where they were about these hot topics, it did reduce polarization. And I think that involvement in the IPA is a very important way for psychoanalysts to hear points of view that might be very different and from very different cultural experiences, as Claudio was saying. And I think that being in the room together and actually getting to know people has been a very important factor in reducing polarization, certainly within the IPA board.
So, Herbert Blas, next, and the same alternatives. If you have an answer to the question, and or if you'd like to engage in dialogue with the other presenters, what are your thoughts about it all?
Yeah, thank you very much first for your stimulating answers. I raised this question because I think that we as psychoanalysts, especially when we try to offer something also to the community of our knowledge about competency, we have to follow our own insights, that we can only offer something which is constructive, which is coming from our own experience, that we have to learn from experience. And only when we are able to learn from experience, then perhaps, and we have digested it and have worked it through as far as it's possible, we can offer this similarly to other people. And this is so important. And I think this is so important for our international community as psychoanalysts. And I'm very grateful. I fully agree to this idea, what you both, Claudio and Sue, have mentioned, that working together clinically, but not only clinically, also working together in several meetings inside the IPA, in meetings between the regions, between the North American region, the Latin American region, as well as the European region, also now the Asia Pacific region, and in the future also from Africa, so all over the world, helps us just what you said, Claudio, not only to listen to the other, but to try to put oneself in the shoes of the other. And this is something that we have to do also as psychoanalysts in our own institutions, I think not in order just to be in a kind of ivory tower, but this is also something which we need for us, but also with something which helps us to be open to the world outside of us. So this is important. And I fully agree that in the past, this has been very important with the change of the Eidingen model. I don't know whether all of the listeners to us are familiar with this. I think a lot of our colleagues are on the screen who are analysts, but perhaps there are also some who are not so familiar with our internal training. I want to say there has been a lot of discussion what is appropriate to learn psychoanalysis for those who are in psychoanalytic education. And some colleagues, and this was let's say the regulation for almost everybody except France, had to be in 4 times a week analysis. In France, it was since several years already 3, or William Alanson White was also 3, as Sue said. So there was and it's still a discussion. What is the appropriate way of doing psychoanalysis? And this was a very, very intense discussion with the danger of polarizing. And now we have a similar discussion, I also agree, that relates to remote sessions, whether there is the possibility to integrate or to what extent to integrate remote sessions in personal analysis during the training. I don't want to go inside all these details, but I want to say I want to agree that the clinical work in working parties are also about these issues of scientific exchange. What does it really make a kind of difference to work 3 times a week or 4 times a week or 5 times a week, or to have a certain amount of sessions which are remote? That means via online sessions, or how many sessions are required to have as in-person meetings. This is very important to discuss amongst us, but in a way, and this is what I just want to emphasize, in a way that we really acknowledge the cultural differences, that we become more just familiar, not only with our own convictions, which is very important. I know we all need our personal beliefs and convictions, but we have to become more familiar with the question, why are the colleagues, for instance, from Latin America, or from North America, of the opinion that they perhaps want to include more remote sessions than most of the Europeans want, just to take this example. And I think only when we discuss this in a way where we do not dilute, on one hand, our own beliefs, but on the other hand, are open to listening to the other, then we have a chance to, I think, have something which is very fruitful and constructive, that we have a real scientific discussion where we can have exchanges, and we have conflicts, of course. I think we need conflicts also to have progress. But I think that if we keep our minds open for the cultural requirements and knowledge of the cultural situation of our colleagues from different parts of the world, then I think it will help to reduce toxic polarization. And once, I will be ready now, once we are able to do this in our own regions, in our institutions, then it will help to be open to the community. There's the last one sentence, just sorry, because in the EPF, in the European Federation, inside the meetings of the presidents, just with respect to this very terrible and tragic Middle East conflict, we had also a discussion about emphasizing our internal empathy, both for the Jewish victims of the brutal attack, but also also our empathy for Palestinian civilians who are under bomb attacks. So this is because there is danger that we in the IPA are also, and we spoke about this already, are also torn apart between being pro-Israel or being pro-Palestinian. So I think this is something which is very dangerous for us. And I think it's very important to have our meetings where we can exchange in a way also as Sue described it. Yes. Thank you.
Dr. Azarek, you had some thoughts.
Yes, I just want to give an example of what Heribert just spoke about, because previously there was only one training model in the IPA until 2006. And during several years, we had very difficult and painful discussions in the board and outside the board. And there was a polarization that was more or less toxic, because it was getting an issue of keeping the IPA together or having a split. And it was a very interesting example of our possibility to function as a work group, as described by Bion. Not a group dominated by basic assumptions, but a group that can listen, try to understand. And after several discussions, we were able to approve in 2006 in Berlin that, in fact, have at least 3 training models, and these models are currently widely accepted. But the surprising thing of that meeting, and I was there because I was chairing the meeting, was the fact that after discussing and fighting, we were able to approve it unanimously, to the surprise of everyone. How was this possible? Because we had time to reflect, listen, discuss more, listen. It was really an experience that may be useful for other situations. Just to exemplify the possibility of arriving at some time, some way of living together with differences.
Waiting for a response. Let's move on to a second question, and especially pertinent given the discussion that we've been having. I think it follows. Sue asked a question. As a possible consequence of the current Israel-Hamas war, among other possible reasons, there is a worldwide surge of anti-Semitism. Could this be considered as an expression of toxic polarization, and why? Sue, would you like to address it first?
Yes, I would. This was actually Claudio's question, but as I thought about it, I felt very inspired to say something about this. I think anti-Semitism is like herpes. It doesn't ever go away. Sometimes it's dormant and you don't see it, and sometimes there's an outbreak. And I think there's been an outbreak right now. It started before October 7th, but it's gotten much worse. You know, the swastikas defacing buildings, the attacks on social media. I think that hate speech in general is tolerated much more than it used to be for a variety of reasons. I got an email recently from someone who is interested in starting therapy, who wrote, I'm currently struggling with being Jewish in a world that seems to not like Jews. I was very moved by that. However, I think it's a very complicated situation, and what I wanted to raise was the question of whether anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are the same thing. There are a lot of, this may be a phenomenon in the United States. I don't know if it's true in other regions. A lot of younger people are protesting in support of the Palestinians. There's groups called Jewish Voice for Peace, another one called Not in My Name, and they chant things like, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. And they say, Intifada now. Are these Jewish people anti-Semitic? Is this a form of anti-Semitism? Do you consider these groups to be anti-Semitic? I know that these Jewish people do not consider themselves to be anti-Semitic. And furthermore, I wanted to say that I'm very uncomfortable and nervous about the way the far right in the United States has latched on to anti-Semitism as a cause célèbre. I don't know if you're all familiar with the 3 university presidents who were interrogated by Elise Stefanik to say whether or not it was tolerable to say, you know, genocide to the Jews. And she pummeled these 3 university professors who gave very inadequate responses. But Elise Stefanik is somebody I would not trust. She used this situation to further the far right point of view. So I think it's very, very complicated, and I'm not sure everything that we're talking about is anti-Semitism really is. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. And I stand corrected. I'm sorry. This was Dr. Azarik's question, and I appreciate your answer. Sue, I may come back around to you after we discuss this. Dr. Blas, do you have some thoughts about this question?
Yes, I have also some thoughts about this question, and I think this is a very important question, and I tend to say yes, that it's an expression of toxic polarization, because I'm not a Jew, by the way, but because it's frightening to me to what extent Jews are now being attacked again in the world, without any distinction being made between the policies of Netanyahu, the Netanyahu government, and the democratic opposition in Israel, and the Jewish faith in general. So I like to just, the question whether we can just think of the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. But I think all this differentiation is lost in a lot of the discussions. And as I said in my opening statement, the existence of anti-Islamism is often mentioned. And I think rightly so, because there's also a lot of anti-Islamism, both anti-Semitism and anti-Islamism. But more and more, I think in the discussion, according to my mind, there is the false equation being made as if when one can only be pro-Judaism and therefore anti-Islamic, or pro-Islam and therefore anti-Semitic. This is a very le terrible simplificateur. This is something very, very simplistic. And so after the brutal Hamas attack on Israel and the now very destructive military action by Israel in Gaza for the civilian people, the false equation is often made that all Jews or friends of Israel are anti-Islamic, or that all Palestinians or supporters of a two-state solution are anti-Semitic. And in fact, the situation is not that simple. There's also, just to go more into politics, a significant Christian minority in Palestine. And there are Arab Israelis, citizens in Israel. And there are many people who do not want to go along with this false religious antagonism. And I personally, for instance, I know a psychoanalytic colleague since decades who is a Palestinian living in Germany, but who is also a member of the Israeli Psychoanalytic Society. So it's just as a sign that there's a possibility just to escape from this false antagonism. But in order to reduce the complexity of these circumstances, and because of the, I think we can say, the centuries-old practice in many countries of projecting all their own evil onto Jews, of people, I see now a return of a growing anti-Semitism as an expression of toxic polarization. Whereby, and I want to emphasize this too, I see also an expression of anti-Islamism. And I think both the anti-Semitism and the anti-Islamism, for me, when it's not just differentiated, when it's just projected all evil onto these different types of ideas and people who are representatives of these ideas, both for me are forms of toxic polarizations.
Dr. Azrick, do you have thoughts?
Yes. Well, this is a very old ghost that follows every Jew throughout his or her life. And of course, being a Jew myself, I have this experience. But we prefer to use something that once I called the deafening silence. When I wrote a paper about racism in Brazil, I call it a deafening silence that white people prefer to follow, not to face the reality of slavery and racism. Currently, these issues are being faced by psychoanalysts also. So I think anti-Semitism exists, it's present, as Sue described it, it's sleeping, then it awakens. And currently, I think we are living this as a toxic polarization. What comes to my mind is the fact that recently a group called International Psychoanalytic Study Group of Antisemitism, chaired by Professor Rosine Perlberg, is trying to study this. And there is also a blog called explainingantisemitism.com. I am also a member of this group of psychoanalysts. And I think that it's a way of trying to understand this from a psychoanalytic point of view. I would like to say that here there is a polarization between the binary thinking and the complexity, as I think we already mentioned it. It's very easy to choose a scapegoat. The scapegoat can be the Jew, the Palestinian, the Arab, the German, the North American, the Black, the people from Asian origin, whoever, men, women. So this is a way of hatred that is present for at least 2,000 years in our Western culture. And I think that it's very difficult to discuss it, because one immediately gets full of hatred and the clashes follow immediately. For instance, both Sue and Herbert were illustrating the complexity of the situation all over the world, in the States, all this discussion. By the way, we followed all this discussion, all the questioning of those three professors by right-wing politicians, using all of this for political reasons also. And so I think that Amos Oz, an Israeli writer, is very useful when we read his books on fanaticism and the way the fanatic person is unable to have humor, is unable to see the other person. And I think we should study this, but also I think that we should very strongly stand against anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, all sorts of fanaticism. And there is a confusion very clear between the criminal terrorist actions of Hamas and the Palestinian people. These are completely different people, and some of them are people who are receiving what they were asking for. But the other is a nation, is a people. And the two-state solution, as far as I know, what I read, all reasonable people think this way. While we will not have their two states living together, this polarization will never end.
Sue?
I noticed in the questions, someone said that they felt that we were engaging in wishful thinking. I thought that was an interesting observation. And I just wanted to know what my co-panelists thought about that, since there has been such a rift. It was very dramatic at APSA with a group that was very, very supportive of the Palestinians, and a listserv fight, and then them leaving, and that this has occurred in many, many other institutes and associations. And how should we address this? This is a very, very serious problem right now.
I didn't understand. Are you saying that we here are expressing wishful thinking?
That was
or
one of the comments.
One comment.
One of the comments. Yes, yes.
Yes, I of course I completely disagree. we are not expressing wishful thinking. We are expressing what any reasonable person would try to reach, some kind of common ground, some kind of dialogue, some kind of living together. Otherwise, what is the solution? To go on killing each other, repeating what the mafia did, because there is this idealization of the death drive. There is this idealization of the killing the other solution. Just take a look of the right-wing politicians in the Israeli government expressing their views, throw a nuclear bomb, destroy Gaza, and Hamas, let's kill all the Jews, let's destroy Israel. So I think we are trying to look for something reasonable, something that's called humanity, human values, possibility of disagreeing, but at least what Herbert mentioned about Freud, the soft voice of the intellect, one day will be heard. If this is wishful thinking, let it be. It's better than killing each other.
Herbert.
Yeah, may I also just thank you, Claudio, and thank you, Sue, just for taking up this question, because I think this is a very important question, and we have to deal with this question every time when we are dealing with the question, how can we perhaps deal with all this destruction? I want to say only a little bit, because this relates to the other questions we have prepared. But perhaps I think that I fully agree that we also have to take into account the sadism, that is inherent in all these toxic polarizations. And that, of course, it would be wishful thinking if we as psychoanalysts would leave out all the issues of destruction, hate, and also sadism. And this was one of my questions, also of pleasure by being violent. I think this is something which we know. I think we as analysts, we know about the human destructivity. But nevertheless, I think what I think is not wishful thinking, and here I fully agree with Claudio, is that we must see that, of course, one of the questions of Claudio was, what is perhaps the most important psychological concept for understanding of the phenomena we are talking about? And he mentioned several, and I chose for myself the feeling of helplessness. I think that the feeling of helplessness is very crucial to understand also toxic polarizations. And at the same time, some people who feel in a way very helpless use sadistic, aggressive and sadistic pleasure in order, unconsciously, of course, just to feel less helpless. And this is which we have to take into account, which we cannot deny. But at the same time, and I think this is really a difficult way to do, but we must be aware of this. We should not be naive or not have a kind of romantic view. But we have no other chance, just as psychoanalysts, than to try to talk to each other. And also, what I want to say, also to address the feelings of what I said in the first webinar, of mortification, of feeling of being heard, when there is a possibility just to deal with this, to deal with, or what so I'm grateful also to Sue for choosing the concept of the chosen trauma. If we dealing with the chosen traumas, I think then it's not wishful thinking.
So I feel so torn right now, because I want to keep talking, but we have 11.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about the questions from the audience, many of them have a similar theme. Many people are expressing strong feelings about a lot of what we're talking about, and there's a consistent theme of, well, what can we do about this? I mean, it's already coming into this discussion by, you know, is this all wishful thinking? We're talking about death drive and sadism, and so I might read, and I think this will continue this discussion rather than change it. One of the questions: contours of free speech and hate speech. How, as psychoanalysts, do we respond to dehumanizing or polarizing speech from within our field, our fellow analysts? I think this brings it back home. Brings up the Gandhi concept. Given the connection between dehumanizing speech and violence against the other, is what the question asks, deplatforming ever ethically appropriate? I think they may be referring to controversies within listservs where discussions escalate and become dehumanizing. So the question brings up shutting down platforms or imposing rules, but it's really more broadly. This is happening within our field, and might this be a place to start? And what do we do? What do we do when we witness dehumanizing speech?
Well, dehumanizing speech is somewhat in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? And I think the listservs, I'm becoming very anti-listserv because it feels a little bit like road rage, where people feel like they could say anything. And I know I know several speakers who've been deplatformed because they're deemed to be too controversial, and I think that's a mistake, because I think we need to encounter people who have these other views and explore our reactions and to try to talk about it.
Just something, if I can add something. I was thinking that while some people, or millions of people, are currently killing each other in the Gaza Strip, there are others sitting in rooms from both sides, and other ones trying to get to a solution, for instance, of leaving or freeing the hostages, or arriving at some kind of terms to end the hostilities. So I think there are both sides, but there are some people who have this idealization of death. During the Spanish Civil War, when general got into the university screaming, "Hail the death! Death to the intelligence!" And I think this was Franco and his followers' example. In my view, this is not what we as analysts should do, but never ever give up, even in the situation of the frog.
There was another question from the audience. Thank you, audience. I hope that we're beginning to answer some of the questions. Question: I used to work as a counselor to staff experiencing problems at work in a psychiatric hospital. They could self-refer. Many came suffering from being bullied. I could count on one hand those who came because they were bullies. They were it was difficult work, but at least they were in the room. How do you get the aggressors in the room?
Wow. I guess I would want to ask this person who worked in the psychiatric hospital how she got the bullies in the room.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like they were self-referred. So there was something about these particular people that got them to seek help. So I guess the question steps before the entry into the room, and how did the so-called bully become aware of their hostile behavior and seek help? Heribert, you had your hand. Heribert,
yes, I'm afraid that my internet connection. Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes.
we can
Yeah.
hear you.
Yes. I'm afraid because I'm in Brussels, I have not so stable internet connection. Sorry for this. No, this is a very important question, and I think perhaps this refers to my idea of the helplessness, also of our helplessness as analysts. But what I want to say, just also with respect to the wishful thinking, I think that this is something which also we have to be aware of analysts. We also need a firm stance whenever it's possible. It's not only what we are talking about. It's not only something of being good people, as if we would only be people who want to have a kind of perhaps naive optimism. I think sometimes we need also a very clear and firm stance, and so it's also important what we are talking about to name anti-Semitism as anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia as Islamophobia, that we need also as international psychoanalysts a clear position. And only perhaps we cannot bring the bullies by this immediately in the room, but I think this could be one of the ways just to be very clear about what we think about what as Claudio, for instance, said, what is really a terroristic attack. A terroristic attack is something very different from in the right to live in one's own country. And I think there we have to make very clear statements. This is also very important for us, I think.
You know, I as I was preparing, I thought about a teacher that I had at the White Institute who I really loved. His name was Amnon Asacharov. And there were rumors about him that he was a member of the Stern Gang, which was ended up being called a terrorist group. And that imbued him with a lot of glamour, that he had been a member of the Stern Gang. And I asked him about it, and he said he had been. And in preparation for this talk, I looked up the Stern Gang, and the Stern Gang was responsible for massacring a Palestinian village and killing over 100 people, including children and women. So I guess what I'm saying is I think we have to look inward to how we glorify violence when we feel that we have been treated with, when we feel weak and vulnerable and feel a lot of shame, and then someone comes in and becomes violent, how we can feel very triumphant about that. We're all able to be able to feel that way.
One of the questions, this resonates with a lot of what's been said. Political and other kinds of polarizations are mostly based in unconscious infantile constructions. And the question implies that makes it difficult to approach. She said, he or she, loyalties are much more heavier forces than justice. This is a long question. I'm trying to distill it. The image of power over oneself experienced in one of the two sides is a very heavy influence. The question asks, it is here where complete orthodox psychoanalytic neutrality is extremely difficult to attain.
Well, I may say something because I wrote about analytic neutrality some time ago. And in my view, what we can have is the possible neutrality into the analytic room, not as a concept, a rigid, but as a general position. That's why I suggested that we called it the possible neutrality. As psychoanalysts working with patients, but as citizens, as people in the world, as analysts working in the community, as human beings. I doubt whether one can use the same idea of neutrality when we face this violence, this kind of destructive behaviors. So Hannah Siegel was very clear in her landmark paper. Silence is the real crime was the title of her paper when she wrote about the nuclear risks to mankind. That's why I think that we cannot be neutral when we are being threatened. And we cannot be neutral when the earth, when we live, is being destroyed. And when our values are being threatened, and when children are being murdered and losing limbs and so on. And we cannot be neutral when we see civilian people being slaughtered, like in October 7th. So I think there are situations in which this concept of neutrality does not apply.
What, Claudia, what if you had a patient who came in and expressed a view that was abhorrent to you? Would you feel that you needed to speak out, or would you try to analyze how you were reacting?
I think there are limits to my capacity to listen and to work with someone who expresses, for instance, very clear Nazi points of view, or very clear, well, we had this problem in Brazil during the previous election, when there was a toxic polarization and there were people against the vaccines, against democratic values. It was almost impossible to work. So I think we should evaluate case by case, but there are situations in which I would say, unfortunately, I am unable to go on working with you. Unless we can try to understand from where these feelings and these ideas are coming from. Sometimes people can improve with analysis when they accept to investigate in the transference and so on. But others are so fanatics that it's impossible. The dialogue becomes impossible.
Claudia, to follow up, difficult point. It's a difficult technical point. So the person who has extreme ideas, so different from our own as an analyst, sometimes it may make the work impossible. One possibility you said is for the analysand, if they can work on from whence these ideas come from within themselves. Would a approach to that be if I disagreed so strongly with the person? I saw their views as anti-Semitic. Could it be the doorway to treatment for me to say that, and to ask the analysand how they could fathom why I would see them that way? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Well, if this is the case, it could be interesting to try to understand what is the transferential feelings at this point, because it's more or less obvious that I am a Jew, but maybe the patient is not aware. So in any case, we could try to analyze his transference towards a Jewish person. What is this meaning? What is the meaning of this? And from transference, go to the build-up of these ideas. It was interesting that recently, when a new patient told me in the first session, I hope you didn't voted for Lula, who is now the president. Otherwise, I cannot be your patient.
Do you feel you have to answer that question?
I felt I had. So I said, I didn't vote for Bolsonaro. let's elaborate now. And if well, he remained.
Very good, very good.
We have 5 minutes.
May I add?
Oh,
sorry,
go ahead,
just,
Herbert. Of
I
course.
just want to support what Claudio said. I have published also about this, because it's difficult to work with one's own countertransference when there are very opposed views. And only, I hope I don't break the confidentiality, but I want to say, because it's really very often to see what does it mean in terms of transference. I remember an adolescent patient who just was more and more some time ago talking about some idealization of Hitler. And he found out that this was something which hurt me very deeply. Yeah. So, and this was very important because in a way, I couldn't stand this. I was really thinking of stopping the analysis. But then I found out that his way to provoke me with this idealization was his way of the kind of confirmation that I would listen to him. So my emotional reaction, because I could not be neutral anymore with neutrality. I was very clear. I was upset, yeah, and I tried to figure out. And then, as I could make this as an interpretation and say, now you have found something with which you are very sure that you can reach me. I said you can reach me. Then he told me a story about his suicidal impulses and that his parents never had listened to these suicidal impulses. And as this just more and more, I don't want to tell them much more about this analysis, as this was worked through, then this for this young guy, this provocative Hitler idealizations disappeared.
Wow.
So after
That's
not immediately, not
moving.
with one session, but this was a process, and this it was very important to go on with this person and to work on my countertransference, of course.
Yeah.
This is similar to what Claudio said.
We only have a couple of more minutes, but and I'm not sure that there's time to go around for final thoughts, but I do offer the possibility of either final thoughts or to continue this discussion, because that's really the meat of this event.
May I say just one, two sentences, because I've read from a Polish colleague or listener a question, what about Germany and the acknowledgement of Poland? I really regret, I have not time to say, if there is the impression that the German society or association would not acknowledge all the atrocities that Germany has done in Poland. I personally, I think we are working on this, and my impression is that your impression, dear colleague, or whoever wrote this, is not fitting to my impression, because I think that working through about all the atrocities the German army had done in Poland is very, very central to my thinking. And we had an IPF conference in Warsaw in 2018. And there, for instance, we were working a lot of the history. Hello?
We are ending. We have about 30 seconds.
Okay, I will stop at this. Yeah.
Okay, it's central to all this. So
can I just say that I think that the process that we went through today with ourselves and with the audience shows that it takes a lot of talking and thinking together before you can actually encounter those thoughts and feelings that become so abhorrent to listen to in the other. I think we were starting to approach that.
So with that, we'll stop. I appreciate everyone, the panelists, the audience, the people behind the scenes here at the IPA. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.